Grüß, willkommen in einem Verregens video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 18 of my organisation series of videos. In this video I'll attempt to provide an overview of the structure and development of the German Panzer Division in World War II. I've also created videos on the structure of German and Russian infantry divisions, but I feel that level of detail is probably overkill. What I wanted to provide was an overview of the structure of the division, Panzer Division, and how it changed during the war. Parts of this included providing an idea of how the combat effectiveness of the various formations changed during the war. In addition to my more detailed videos, I've also created a set of videos showing a very basic view of how the various battalion strengths and combat strengths changed in most of the armies involved in World War II. That is possibly too simple for my objectives, so I'm attempting something in between, which is what this video is all about. I cannot provide hyper detail of each individual division. I'm mainly focused on a typical division, at least according to official structures. Obviously such a division in the field and in combat would rapidly degrade, so that needs to be considered when I provide my overviews. My main focus, in addition for this video, is the battalion. Once I go down to the company level, this TO&E would be significantly longer and more complex. I may come back and break down battalions to company levels, but not in this video. Let's go over the charts I'll be using. The first item that I wanted to cover is the typical division in a specific period. In this case, the 1st Panzer Division on the 3rd of September 1939. Below that is the regiment or equivalent level of command listed. The number of each regiment is indicated, as is its combat strength. I'll discuss how I derive this combat value later. The final formation on this chart is the battalion, or equivalent. The number of each battalion is included, in this case 3 Panzer battalions. Moving over to the right, we come to a battalion's combat strength, in this case 773, followed by a battalion code, and finally combat values, using a set of rules based on SPI Modern Battles board game. This value will generally be ignored in this video as it's used for a figure gaming set of rules, not for this video, but the other values will be used as they provide an idea of the battalion strength and type. In front of the battalion name is a mobility symbol, which could be motorized, horse, cycle, armored, and so on. For some of the battalions, an idea of the weapon within it is provided, that is, the main weapon. In this case, this is a battalion which consists of 10.5 cm howitzers. Above this entry, you will see a 3.7 cm gun, which in this case is an anti-tank gun. Now let's discuss the combat values or strengths. This is the points value of the formation using a rather old set of figure gaming rules, in this case Corps Commander. I could have used any other set of rules, and while the results would vary a bit, I found they are generally similar. Of course, how close do these values reflect reality is another question, which in this video I'll not be covering. In the point system I'm using for this video, no provision for a formation's morale is taken into account. Thus, in Germany, 1941 or a German 1941 Panzer battalion would have a significant advantage over a Soviet tank battalion in 1941 in terms of training, morale, etc. But trying to factor that in is so subjective it would make my analysis useless. Viewers will need to make their own take on quality and morale factors if they wish to compare the strengths of one nationality against another. Even within the same nationalities, the troop qualities of a 1941 Panzer battalion would be higher than, let's say, a 1939 or a 1945 Panzer battalion. Viewers really do need to make their own subjective call if they wish to perform such a chronological comparison. This is only giving you the raw points value of the men that served and the equipment that resided within the formation. Let's now get into the analysis portion, starting with 1939 and specifically the German invasion of Poland. This shows a typical Panzer division, specifically the 1st Panzer Division. The division consists of 1 artillery regiment, 1 motorized infantry regiment, and 2 Panzer regiments. There was a brigade structure in this, but it was quickly found to be of minimal value, so it's not included in my chart. Supporting these regiments, there is a pioneer, motorcycle reconnaissance, and anti-tank battalion. Surprisingly, the Panzer regiment's strength is less than that of the infantry, which was mainly due to the use of Panzer Is and II tanks. These vehicles were not what I would call powerful vehicles, even by the standard of the period. The artillery regiment, which was fully motorised, consisted of 3 light and 1 medium artillery battalions. The motorised infantry regiment consisted of 3 motorised infantry battalions. Finally, but certainly not leastly, each of the 2 Panzer regiments consisted of 3 Panzer battalions. The other type of armoured division in the German army in 1939 was the light division, which did vary a great deal. In this case, I'll be looking at the 1st Light Division. The divisional assets consisted of a pioneer battalion and anti-tank battalion. The reconnaissance regiment was unique to the light divisions, and this consisted of a motorcycle and armoured car battalion, with regimental support formations attached, or included. The artillery regiment only consisted of 3 light howitzer battalions. There was no medium artillery or medium howitzer battalions in this division. The motorised infantry regiment was similar to the Panzer division and consisted of 3 motorised infantry battalions. Finally, in this case, the 2 Panzer regiments only consisted of 2 Panzer battalions each. Let us now move on to 1940. The Germans converted their light divisions into Panzer divisions, so we only have one divisional structure to deal with. However, almost every Panzer division was different in some way. The most common difference was equipment, such as different tanks, but there was some differences with the structure of the motorised infantry as well, comparatively minor, I have to admit. In this analysis, I'm using the 3rd Panzer Division as my typical formation. The divisional support elements remain much the same, although there was some minor changes in the motorcycle battalion. The Panzer Artillery Regiment remained unchanged. For this division, the motorised infantry remained unchanged compared to 1939, although there were 4 versions of this regimental structure. Each had some minor differences. In theory, the Panzer Regiment did not change compared with 1939. However, many divisions possessed different tanks, which did affect their combat capability. I should point out there was one major structural change. The brigade level was removed from the division. Overall, we can say the Panzer divisions did not experience much change between the Polish campaign in 1939 and the French campaign in 1940. I'll be breaking 1941 up into 2 parts, one covering the African campaign and the other Russian campaign. The Germans recreated their light division structure when they sent forces to assist Italy in Libya, creating the 5th Light Division. One interesting point about the 5th Light Division was the infantry consisted of motorcycle-mounted troops. While these formations were often found at battalion strength in a reconnaissance role, here we have an entire regiment of this troop type in a single division. The other interesting feature about the light division was the Panzer Artillery Regiment, which only consisted of a single battalion of 10.5 cm howitzers. By March, the structure of the light division had changed. One interesting point was the addition of an early tank destroyer battalion. These did exist in 1940, at least one did, and did also exist in 1941 in Russia, but they were mainly held at corps level. In this particular case, the tank destroyer battalion was held at a divisional level. Another interesting point about the 5th Light Division was the addition of a mixed flak battalion, which would normally only be held at corps or army level. The 2 cm arm flak battalion was commonly attached to a division, but the mixed battalions were normally not. I expect due to the ad hoc nature of the campaign, formations were simply thrown together as required, which is why we see these unusual characteristics. As this formation represents a fringe case, I'll not be focusing on the Panzer Division sent to Africa in any detail, but will provide a brief overview of those, for those interested. The Panzer divisions in Russia represented a better view of the structure and strength of an official, if typical, Panzer division. The Germans made a great deal of changes after the French campaign, which allowed them to increase the number of Panzer divisions. While this did, in theory, reduce their combat strength, in practice the changes resulted in a much better balanced formation. It could be argued that German Panzer divisions were tank-heavy in 1940, and in many cases failed to work together with their motorised infantry. That is, the tanks failed to work with their motorised infantry. This caused significant tank losses at the start of the French campaign and even the Polish campaign, and many of the changes were designed to ensure this did not occur again. The other interesting point to raise is the structure of the Panzer Division now no longer matched the way it operated. with the Panzer division often being divided up into three groups which mix battalions between the regiments and even incorporating the divisional assets into one of the three formations, basically the famous German Kampfgruppen system. For this analysis, I'll be using the 4th Panzer Division in 1941 as my typical structure. The division supporting formations remained much the same compared with 1940, with minor changes in the motorcycle battalion and slightly more changes in the anti-tank battalion. In 1941, the biggest change was an addition of a flak battalion. The Panzer Artillery Regiment did not change at all. 3 light and 1 medium, all motorised. One major change was the beefing up of the motorised infantry battalions, mainly regimental support formations which were added. The other change was an increase in the number of motorised infantry regiments from 1 to 2 in each division. The number of Panzer regiments dropped to 1 from 2, and the number of Panzer battalions in each regiment dropped from 3 to 2. On the other hand, due to superior tanks, the combat strength of the Panzer battalions actually increased. The way the battalions were structured in combat varied as much as the number of different Panzer divisions, but in one example, a Panzer battalion was allocated to each of the motorised infantry regiments, and in turn, a motorised infantry battalion from each of those motorised infantry regiments was split off and joined up with the reconnaissance battalion and other formations such as the anti-tank battalion. This occurred at least once in Army Group North during the early period of the German invasion of Russia. While the battalions generally stayed together, they were paired up as required with whatever formations were required. This doctrine worked very well, and we can say the true Panzer division was probably first officially implemented in Russia in 1941, or perhaps the Balkans in the previous month. Unofficially, I have to admit, this flexibility did exist in 1940 as well, but it depended highly on the commander. Let's now move on to October 1941. In this case, we'll be looking at the 2nd Panzer Division. The structure of the division did not officially change, but the division did differ a bit depending on the equipment. In this case, the Panzer battalions were weaker than the 4th Panzer Division in June 1941, mainly due to losses. Losses had significantly reduced the official strength of the division further, almost across the board. The Germans did a good job repairing their tanks, and some new tanks were arriving from the west, although the numbers were trivial. In September, it was estimated the 2 Centre Panzer groups had a tank strength of 71% of their official numbers. I would estimate a similar 29% attrition would have occurred with other vehicles and manpower. This reduction of non-tank strength is not reflected in this table, but tank losses certainly are. Let's now go back to Africa in 1942, and in this case we'll be looking at a proper Panzer division. In addition to the 5th Light Division, the Germans also sent the 15th Panzer Division to Africa. Like the 5th Light, it was ad hoc, but was closer to an official Panzer Division. Meanwhile, back in Russia, the Panzer divisions were evolving due to the harsh realities of war and the lack of equipment and manpower. From now on, I'll be providing the actual structures of the example Panzer divisions rather than their official strength. It should be noted that the structure and strength of the Panzer divisions were beginning to vary a great deal, so these structures no longer represented the norm. This chart shows the 11th Panzer Division, which was beginning to diverge from the official structure quite a bit. The motorcycle battalion was significantly beefed up in this division. The flak battalion was missing at division level, but this was instead directly distributed to the regiments. The Panzer Artillery Battalion had not changed to any degree, but the lack of manpower resulted in a reduction of supporting formations. The motorised infantry battalions experienced significant changes, with flak or flak directly attached to the regiments, and with one regiment having a half-track mounted battalion. In this case, the 110th Infantry Regiment consisted of 2 half-track mounted battalions, which was very unusual, and this structure did not remain for long as there was a real lack of half-tracks. Putting that aside, according to this strength metric, the resulting battalion was very powerful. This was due to supporting formations to a large extent. Now we come to the Panzer regiments, which retained 2 Panzer battalions each. However, the battalion strength had risen significantly, in this case due to the deliveries of better tanks and the retirement of Panzer Is and Panzer II tanks. Let's now move forward to the end of 1942, in this case covering the 11th Panzer Division. One formation which is now missing is the motorcycle battalion. Otherwise, the support formations remained apart from a number of adjustments which increased their combat strength. Again, mainly due to new equipment rather than any real structural change. The Panzer Artillery Regiment remained the same, 3 light and 1 medium battalion. The motorised infantry regiment experienced more change. In this case, each regiment consists of 2 motorised and 1 half-track mounted infantry battalions each. While not a formal structure, this happened to be the structure in 1942. You will probably notice that when you look at Neerhorster, you see what a Panzer division looked like from 1942 onwards. It rarely follows the official structure. The Panzer regiments remain much the same, although due to losses the strength of the battalion had suffered. Basically there was a lot less tanks, even if the tanks were better. Let's now look at 1943, although in this case I have started, or I will be starting, with the Battle of Kursk, during which the Panzer and Panzergrenadier regiments were generally up to strength. The Grossdeutschland Panzergrenadier Division, while not a Panzer division, had a number of powerful Panzer battalions attached to it, such as the Panther tanks. The Panzergrenadier Division consisted of a tank destroyer battalion, a flank battalion, and an assault gun battalion. The Grossdeutschland Panzergrenadier Division was a very well-equipped division, so was in no way typical, but one change which occurred in the Panzer Artillery Regiment was the addition of self-propelled howitzer battalions, which was rolled out to the other Panzer divisions. The Panzergrenadier regiments were similar to the Panzergrenadier regiments of the 11th Panzer Division back in December 1942. 2 regiments consisted of 2 motorised and 1 half-track mounted Panzergrenadier battalions. The Grossdeutschland Panzer Regiment was not typical for the Panzergrenadier divisions, and the addition of this formation is what makes this division closer to a Panzer division than a Panzergrenadier division. 2 battalions were equipped with Panzer IVs, 1 with Tiger tanks, and 2 attached Panzer battalions equipped with Panther tanks. This was a very powerful Panzer regiment. A more typical 1943 Panzer division is the 12th Panzer Division. This TO&E, dated August 1943, shows some interesting changes. The attached formations included a flak battalion, possibly due to increased Soviet air power. The tank destroyer battalion was becoming standard, providing highly mobile anti-tank assets. Finally, the reconnaissance battalion was significantly beefed up. The Panzer Artillery regiments had formed up into a structure which included 1 light howitzer battalion, 1 medium howitzer battalion, both motorised, that is, pulled by trucks, towed guns pulled by trucks, and a mixed light-medium self-propelled howitzer battalion. Due to a lack of half-tracks, only 1 regiment contained a half-track mounted infantry battalion. The other 3 motorised infantry battalions were all truck-mounted. While the number of tanks in the Panzer battalion had not changed much, the inclusion of more powerful tanks had resulted in the Panzer battalions increasing in strength. In many ways, 1944 represented the peak and also eventual decline of the Panzer divisions. Starting with the 12th Panzer Division in January 1944, we see little change in the divisional supporting formations. While the reconnaissance battalion was present in the late 1943 structure, I'm surprised at how powerful this formation was, rivaling the Panzer IV armed Panzer battalions in strength, at least according to the points system I'm using. This formation was a combined armed formation rather than an all-tank formation. There was no changes in the Panzer Artillery Regiment, 1 light, 1 medium and 1 self-propelled howitzer battalion. The Panzergrenadier regiments also remained the same. Once again, assuming the point system does reflect combat capability, the half-track mounted Panzergrenadier battalions was very powerful as well, rivaling the Panzer IV armed Panzer battalions in terms of combat strength. Obviously, they would be more effective in defence than offence, and they would have the advantage and disadvantage of infantry, but overall a very significant or a very impressive formation. By 1944, we were beginning to see a Panzer regiment which consisted of a Panzer IV armed Panzer battalion and a Panther armed Panzer battalion. While this structure did exist in late 1943 for some divisions, by 1944 it was becoming more common. The Panther armed Panzer battalion was the most powerful battalion-sized formation of the Panzer division. After the significant losses in France and Russia in mid-1944, the Germans implemented a major change in the structure of their Panzer divisions. The support formations, in principle, remained the same, but several battalions experienced reductions in terms of manpower and equipment, which you can see in the reduction of strength of the reconnaissance and tank destroyer battalions. The Panzer Artillery remained much the same, 1 light, 1 medium and 1 SP howitzer battalion. The Panzergrenadier regiment structure remained the same, but the strengths of most of the battalions had dropped. Finally, the same reduction in strength can be seen in the Panzer battalions. So while the structure of the Panzer division remained much the same, this was a smaller and weaker formation overall. I assume this was due to the massive losses the Germans had suffered and a desire to maintain as many separate Panzer divisions as possible. If we look at the SS Panzer divisions, we do not see the same reduction in combat strength in the Panzer regiments, but the Panzer Grenadiers and some of the battalion at divisional level are similar to regular army strengths or reduced strengths. The 1st SS Panzer Division did possess extra divisional level formations such as the assault gun battalions and flank battalions. The Germans did prepare a new 1945 structure, but this was never implemented. I'm not going to be covering this theoretical structure in much detail, but this formation was beginning to resemble the Russian brigades, tank brigades. The Panzer regiments now consisted of one Panzer battalion, which I must admit was powerful, supported by two motorised infantry battalions. The Panzer Grenadier regiments, of which there were two, lacked half-tracks or armour, so may have been intended to act in a defensive nature. The structure indicated the previous system of forming ad hoc formations to meet a specific requirement was no longer a priority, which could have been due to a lack of experienced troops. I'm uncertain of the thought process behind this formation, but the number of tanks had dramatically reduced. By looking at the structure of the German Panzer divisions between 1939 and 1945, you can see two basic development areas. The simplest change was based on equipment. As time progressed, the quality and effectiveness of the equipment increased, from improvements in tanks to the addition of new armoured vehicles such as self-propelled howitzers, mortars, anti-aircraft, tank destroyers, assault guns and armoured personnel carriers. This is what gamers would consider the sexy changes, as all these nice armoured vehicles are impressive on a playing area. The more interesting change is the changes in the structure of the division and how the divisions operated. It took a while to identify an ideal structure, and then the ideal structure of the division in action. In 1939, the Panzer battalions would operate, in some cases independently, and with minimal considerations of other arms. The exceptions were the divisions under the command of very good commanders such as Guderian, which does indicate he understood the correct way of using Panzer divisions. However, after heavy losses in some engagements in Poland and Belgium, the rest of the German commanders quickly realised this issue, and by 1941 had adopted a level of combined arms operation in all their Panzer divisions, which was unmatched until 1944, by the Allies, that is. This concludes episode 18 of my video series on the German Panzer divisions, with a focus on the structure down to battalion level. Alle guten Dinge, kommen zu einem Ende.